Okay, the Southwest cultures. In this particular case, this is the Anasazi, and taking a specific region known as Chaco Canyon. And Chaco Canyon is in the basin that connects Arizona to New Mexico, or at least it's that area that Native peoples have always visited, that the United States is going to call Arizona and New Mexico. But what's important to appreciate is the interconnectedness of the area, because what this particular documentary shares is that the Southwest is connected to Mexico. The Southwest, likewise, is connected to Cahokia and the Mississippian region. And the entire Western Hemisphere is interconnected. And it took thousands and thousands and thousands of years to come to this interconnectedness. So again, the native peoples have always been in movement across these areas. They have been exchanging goods and services, and most importantly, as I shared with you from the beginning, the formation and control of labor forces is key to understanding how these civilizations thrived, because labor forces are constantly moving back and forth what eventually is going to become this border. And so remember, migration is important, especially in native societies. So one of the things that's most important is to come to this level of complexity. It took thousands and thousands of years. And I just did that within 50 minutes in this class, just trying to share with you a history of interconnectedness of the Western Hemisphere prior to the arrival of Europeans. And so this documentary that I'm using as part of the course, Chaco Canyon, students, you'll be able to watch it and appreciate it. This documentary, I'm using it because it helps us appreciate the spiritual dimension to a people's migration. And I want to emphasize this because all too often we do not take into account a people's spirituality in the decisions made to migrate. And after all, aren't we as human beings constantly involved in the spirit world, asking for direction, especially when making the decisions to move to a new place? So let's understand something basic to Native people's lives once Columbus arrives in 1492. And that is the doctrine of discovery. And so if you could put down on the bottom thirds, Europe and the doctrine of discovery, this is important. The doctrine of discovery is the international law that governed European exploration and the discovery, quote unquote, just the term discovery of new lands around the world for centuries. So let's understand and appreciate something about racism. The doctrine of discovery is an international legal principle that allegedly granted Europeans first, and then those who are going to become Americans, Euro-Americans, property and sovereignty rights or claims over native peoples and native lands. Just as soon as Europeans, quote unquote, discovered these lands, and then their progeny, known as Americans, as they discover more lands. And this is the doctrine of discovery. Now, the doctrine plays an important part of American history and modern day Native American law. The doctrine provided under international law that newly arrived Europeans immediately and automatically acquired property rights in native lands. And as a result, they gained governmental, political, and commercial rights over the inhabitants without the knowledge or consent of native peoples. And this is the problems that we still have today with regards to societies and their disrespect for native traditions. When Europeans and then Americans are going to plant their national flags, are going to plant their religious symbols over newly, quote unquote, discovered lands, they're demonstrating a legal claim to native territory. They're telling native peoples, these are our lands, not yours. It is in this way that nations of the Western Hemisphere, and I'm talking about every nation of the Western Hemisphere, because every nation of the Western Hemisphere is racist towards native peoples, from Canada all the way down to Argentina, the United States likewise. So all nations of the Western Hemisphere today use the doctrine of discovery as an usurpation or as their right to usurp land for themselves through a legal process. So if Native Americans, of course, if Native peoples resisted these encroachments, well, my goodness, how could they resist Christian civilized European nations? So war is rationalized by Europeans, and then eventually those Europeans that will call themselves Americans, and I'm talking about North Americans, Central Americans, and South Americans, because every American has the prejudice and the biases towards Native peoples. And so, of course, these the means to bring about the legal justification for conquest and colonization is the doctrine of discovery. The doctrine of discovery laid the legal foundation for the occupation of the Western Hemisphere. Once Columbus initiates the encounter between what is referred to as the Old World and the New World, European powers, specifically for our interests, Spain, France, and England, and then the United States, are going to negotiate agreements for the recruitment of labor forces for the expansion of markets. In the process, international accords are going to be written specifically connecting the movement of populations to the expansion of markets. So Spain, France, and England actively recruited populations for the expansion of colonial markets. And their foreign policies incorporated legal instruments to contract and form labor forces. So again, contract and form labor forces, that's the vocabulary word, that the concepts that I introduced to you at the beginning of the course. So Spain, England, and France are going to search for labor forces, and they're going to create labor contracting agencies in Europe, then in Africa, and in Asia. And these labor forces are going to find their way to the Western Hemisphere. So these colonial powers had to remove Native peoples to accommodate immigrant populations that were recruited. When the United States was created, the founding fathers inherited the British colonial experience that shaped the way the Constitution approached labor formation, immigration, and settlement policy, and of course, Native removal. So immigration was tied to labor force recruitment, immigration was tied to labor force participation, immigration was tied to Native removal. We never ever understand that. We never ever deal with that when we talk about immigration, okay? So it's very important to understand something about immigration, its relationship to Native peoples. Foreign policy was instrumental in securing workers for the expansion of markets. Foreign policy was instrumental for the negotiation of lands and Native removal. So, last week we addressed pre-revolutionary immigration because prior to the creation, or 2 weeks ago, we addressed pre-revolutionary immigration. So prior to the creation of the United States, immigration was so common that colonial governments, the British, the French, the Spanish, and they're establishing colonies in the Western Hemisphere, they're establishing colonies in North America and in Mexico and in Cuba and in the Caribbean. So the British, the French, and the Spanish are competing against each other to claim more and more lands, more and more native lands. So as the Spanish, the French, and the British are bringing in more populations, they didn't regulate the flow of these populations. Yeah. Can you imagine, and if you can kind of share my shirt, so you focus in on the shirt, can you imagine, yes, there we go. I like this particular shirt, it's pretty good. Can you imagine leaving it up to Native peoples to create an immigration policy? Can you imagine leaving it up to Native peoples to create a labor policy? Well, let's go see what happened at Plymouth Rock. Let's go to an interpretive critique of the irony of immigration reform in relationship to the Native experience. Let's watch a film clip by Current TV's Super News and appreciate their play with prejudices and stereotypes to get a message across. So, of course, those of you who are watching live, please call in and comment on this particular message. Explain to me the irony of immigration and Native rights, and explain to me why I'm wearing this shirt, okay? So let's go, students. Let's go and let's take a look at the immigration debate.